by coding software usually has check software that will give you a conflict. So that you don't try to run a program when there's still a conflict in the code, so you can fix it. So I would argue that at least one of the things that really developed during the Middle Ages was a development in logic. And that's going to play a big role, because once Aristotle's philosophy in total comes back into Europe, and it could have come from several ways. One way was through Spain. Remember, because Spain is dominated primarily by the Muslim, the Moors in Spain, and their universities are open, so there's Jewish people allowed to study and be themselves, and Christians allowed to be themselves. But it's when the Christians, especially El Cid, kicked the Moors out of Spain, that they impose a very harsh one religion program on people, which is one reason why many of the Jews left, including the family that will give birth to Spinoza. They moved to the Netherlands, etc. So lots of historical stuff there. And some of what was taught in the universities clearly came from the Muslim traditions, including Aristotle, translations of Aristotle, which then entered into Northern Europe or Europe. And the other possible route for it was from the Crusades, because as the Muslim empire was basically closing off what was left of Europe, very close actually. In fact, I understand that the one battle that was definitely going to seal the fate of Christianity and put it to sleep ended up not happening, because the Muslim emperor decided, I don't feel like it. And they packed up and left and took his army back. They were like at the gates of Vienna or something. And it was very close being the end of that. If you look it up, there's very little bit of, Christianity left, and the Pope was pissed off at Luther because Luther was rebelling against the church while all this was happening. It's just crazy, so much stuff. But so Aristotelian thought comes back in and gives a birth to what is called the Renaissance, the rebirth, and in result of that familiarity with Aristotelian thinking and the more complex logic systems that were available, they ended up realizing that Aristotle had made a lot of errors. And so there was a revolution against Aristotelian science, which we refer to as the scientific revolution. So in a sense, if you didn't have the developments in logic that happened during the so-called Dark Ages, you wouldn't have had the scientific revolution that came out of it. So thank you, Boethius. Sorry he died in prison because he was a follower of Athanasius, and at the time the emperor, who I think was Theodosius, Theodoric. All right. So Boethius, important. But let's get to the ontological argument. It didn't have that name initially. That name comes to it from Immanuel Kant, who analyzed all of the different arguments for the existence of God and labeled them in 3 different batches. The first was the ontological argument, which literally means ontos is the thing. That's the word, thing, basically, ontos. And so the study of the thing, or we would say the definition, the study of the definition. From the definition itself, it seems like, et cetera, et cetera. Kant called it that. He also had the cosmological arguments, which we'll see next class. The cosmological arguments come from looking at the cosmos and noticing cause and effect relationships and saying, well, if this happens, it must be that this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and the whole chain of causality, right? And so you get the cosmological argument, right? And then the third type that Kant explained or analyzed was the teleological argument. Remember, the teleos is the purpose of design. And so that's the argument we usually say is from design. The argument from design, right? I had to be a designer. How else could you get the perfect eye, working, et cetera? So 3 different types of arguments. The ontological argument is one. And the most famous example of it is St. Anselm of Canterbury. Is Anselmo would actually be his Italian name, or French, whatever. Beck. But he was Benedict. I thought he was the head of the Abbey of Cluny. But something I was reading last night said it was Beck, and it looks like it still is a monastery, etc. Interesting life, interesting time, because he eventually became the Archbishop of England, or whatever you called it back then. And that was shortly after the Normans had attacked and taken over much of the country from the Saxons. You're familiar with William the Conqueror. At the time of Anselm, it was his son William II, also called Rufus, who was the king. And being the archbishop always caused a problem in England with the king, because the king wants to do stuff, and the bishop's job is to say, like, no, that's bad, you shouldn't do that. And one of the things, that Rufus wanted to do was just take the Saxons' land and so on. I don't know if, when I was a kid, Ivanhoe was a fun read. Sir Walter Scott, Ivanhoe. Nope. But in any case, the Saxons and the Normans, even though the war they lost, they still were mostly Saxons there. And so the Normans, wanted to set up shop and take over as much as they could. And the Saxons, of course, wanted to keep as much as they could, so you had an ongoing conflict. Well, in comes the Archbishop, and the Archbishop is pro-Saxon, which infuriates the king. But it's like they were arguing, Saxon lives matter. Am I allowed to say that? Is that all right? I'm getting in trouble for that.
You're okay.
I sweated bullets over that, thinking about it. I should use this. No, I shouldn't. Yes, I should. No, I should. You get the idea. In any case, that causes the conflict, and Rufus sent Anselm back to the Pope. Right? Are you sure go check with the Pope? And every time, okay, I'll go back. And back then, you don't hop on a Piper Cub, loaded with moose meat and fly to Rome to check. But you had to walk or ride, and it was a long trip. Although Anselm clearly enjoyed getting away from England. Apparently, some people, were not really that happy in such a climate. It's kind of miserable, I guess, at the time. Still is, from what I understand. Anybody been to England? Nobody? Nobody been to England? Yes? Rainy all the time?
Yeah.
Kind of like here.
Yeah.
I suppose. In any case, so he made multiple trips back and forth. But he did write, and he was considered the one to define God. And by the way, that's still today the definition that theologians use. So when you get theologians all together, even I remember one that was here a few years ago, the professor at Yale gave a lecture for us, and basically told atheists, if you call yourself an atheist, you really should be a deist or a theist, because you're actually in agreement. But you're better off if you're a theist or a deist instead of an atheist. It's just, not really brilliant, to be that way. But what was his main point? The definition of God, which we'll read. Let's take a look at it, see what you think of it. In fact, I believe today's quiz question for you is, so which do you prefer? I have two for today. You could use, is there a largest pizza in Eagle River? Obviously that was for a class at Eagle River. Is there a largest pizza? Period. That would be one quiz question. The other one, though, is what do you think of Anselm's definition? Prefer the pizza question. In any case, truly there is a God, although the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Where in the Bible does that quote come from? Anyone recognize it? It's a psalm. I don't remember which psalm. Maybe it's 14. Because he quotes it right there. You think? Could be. And so, Lord, do you, who do give understanding to faith, give me so far as you knowest it to be profitable to understand that you are as we believe, and that you are that which we believe. And indeed we believe that you are a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. That's it. That's your definition. Or is there no such nature, since the fool has said in his heart, there is no God? Psalms 14. There's two different numbering systems for the Psalms, but I think the change takes place after 14, so 14. But at any rate, this very fool, when he hears of this being of which I speak, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, understands what he hears. Does that make sense to you? Yes? I'm not calling you a fool, by the way. By the way, I think that the fool he had in mind was himself. I mean, that's just my interpretation. Could be the fool, mentioned in the Psalms, right? But the fool understands what he hears. That's a misprint. It says B hears. That's wrong. And what he understands is in his understanding, although he does not understand it to exist. So you can understand that the definition is that in which nothing greater can be conceived. But what does that mean to you? Does that mean that I can conceive of a being that is that? For it is one thing for an object to be in the understanding, and another to understand that the object exists. For example, we can understand unicorn, but at the same time we understand that unicorns do not exist, actually, right? No problem, right? So clearly we can imagine lots of objects that don't exist. Doesn't mean that, we'll find one that does exist. When a painter first conceives of what he will afterwards perform, he has it in his understanding. And a friendly little sky here with some trees over here, etc. When a painter first conceives, etc. He has it in his understanding, but he does not yet understand it to be, because he has not yet performed it. But after he has made the painting, He both has it in his understanding and he understands that it exists because he has made it. I should email them and tell them, keep mixing be and he. Hence, even the fool is convinced that something exists in the understanding, at least than which nothing greater can be conceived. For when he hears of this, he understands it. And whatever is understood exists in the understanding. I understand it. It exists